Alright, when implementing sessions in our Node.js app, we will use the browser cookie method where the session ID is stored in the user's browser as a cookie, while the actual data is stored in the MongoDB database on MongoLab. So without further ado, let's jump back into our code. Now, Express doesn't come with a built-in sessions manager. There is a module that you have to download for that. It is a sensible decision actually because sessions may not be required in every application, and a built-in sessions manager would simply mean excess baggage. Totally avoidable. Therefore, let's first install the Express-session module like so. I'm using version 1.12.1 for this example at the time of this recording. Now, as explained earlier, we are going to store our sessions data in our MongoDB instance on MongoLab, while the associated session ID would be stored in the user's browser cookie. To enable the Express session module to interface and talk to MongoDB, we'll download a module called Connect-Mongo. I'm using version 1.1.0 in this example. Here's an interesting bit. Connect Mongo's version 1.1.0 comes to you written in ES6 with a fallback in case you're using an older version of Node. Alright, next we'll create a new folder and a module for managing our sessions. By now you're quite familiar with this process. We are creating a folder here called session and an index.js file inside of it. Begin by creating a constant called session where we'll bring in the Express-session module like so. We will also create another constant called Mongo store where we'll bring in the Connect Mongo module and we'll invoke its default function by passing in a reference to the Express session module like so. This lets Connect Mongo listen in on configuration settings from within the Express session module when Connect Mongo is actually brought into the picture when initializing the session. Now, remember we are storing the session ID in a cookie within the user's browser. When we go back and access this cookie, we want to somehow ensure the fact that we were the ones who originally created this cookie and that the data has not been tampered with. This is important to prevent a hacker from hijacking a session cookie to gain access to secured routes in your app. The way this is achieved is by using signed session cookies, or simply session cookies which have been encrypted using a hash or a secret key which only we know as the owner of the app. So the first step in this process is that we'll go into our development.json and we'll create a new key called session secret. Which at the moment will be set to a simple string like so. Remember, in the development environment, a simple and perhaps a predictable string like this works. In production, however, we'll make this string a bit more harder to predict. Make sure you also go into your config loader file to export the equivalent key from the production environment as well as shown here. This way, we'll configure a key called session secret in Heroku as an environment variable when we deploy our app. Now, our session module, the one that we are building here, has a singular purpose. To understand that, you need to know that the Express session module basically offers a middleware function that, like everything else in Express, plugs into the request and response and provides us with the ability to use sessions. So first, using an if statement, we'll check to see if our execution environment is production or not. If it is production, then we would want to configure the Express session middleware differently than when in a development environment. Let's begin with the development environment first. We'll use module.exports to export out the middleware function from our sessions module. So invoke the session function, which essentially refers to the Express session module's default function, and pass in an object like so. The first configuration setting here would be the session secret, or the key that we will use to hash and sign our session cookie. This would be set to config.sessionSecret. And before we forget, let's bring in the config module as well so that we can access the session secret value based on the execution environment for the app. The next option here is called resave. We'll set this to false since it's true by default. If this option is set to true, then our middleware will attempt to store the session data again and again into our session store, even if the data in the session has not changed. This means a ton of extra calls to your database and hence not desirable in all situations. Another option that we'll use is called save uninitialized, and this will be set to true while we are in the development environment. This option essentially will create a session cookie in the user's browser as well as the associated entry in the session store, even when the session has not been initialized with any data. So essentially, no data but still a session cookie. Here I'm setting it to true while I'm in development, but you'll see that we'll set this to false when we're in production. This is because while in production, we don't want sessions to be initialized when there is nothing to store in it. This would cause unwarranted calls and documents in the session store, MongoDB in our case, even when we've got nothing to store in the session. In fact, privacy laws might require you to only create a cookie in the user's browser if and only if the user logs in and we have data to store, or else an infringement might occur. Alright, repeat this piece of code for when in the production environment like so, and as I've just explained, we will set save uninitialized to false here. Finally, we come to our session store. The session store is where Express will store the session data. If you do not specify the store, Express will store session data in memory. While that works in development, it is absolutely not recommended for production, since in-memory would not scale and would end up killing your server easily. In production, you need something like MongoDB or a fast key value store like Redis, which is another great session store option for Node.js apps. We will not use Redis in this example because we can simply repurpose our MongoDB instance here. So let's create a new instance of Connect Mongo by calling its identifier MongoStore like so, and in the options, we'll pass in an object where we'll set an option called Mongoose Connection. Let's also quickly bring in our DB module as well, since we want raw access to our database connection through Mongoose. Now in the Mongoose connection option, simply point to db.mongoose.connection. This refers to the Mongoose instance that we had exported from the DB module, and the .connection allows Connect Mongo to interface with MongoDB directly. This way, you don't have to connect twice to the same MongoDB instance, and one single Mongoose connection serves the app plus Connect Mongo simultaneously. This completes our session manager module. The next thing that I'll do is to channel this module through our overall app using the index.js that sits in the root of our app folder. Note that you don't have to do this. I prefer channeling all modules through a single window because that just keeps the app organized and easy to understand. You can understand this better now because we'll go into our server.js file, and using the app.use statement, I'll simply call chatcat.session because chatcat refers to the app's index.js, which channels out the session module as well. Otherwise, I would have to bring in the session module separately, and everything is more organized this way. You can, of course, take your own call as you deem fit. Alright, with the session middleware in use, we can now use sessions in our app. Do note that the app.use statement with the call to the session middleware has to appear before you mount the router. Otherwise, you won't be able to use the sessions functionality. Now to test sessions, Let's create a get route called getSession, and in the handler, I'll simply output a string which says my favorite color. And this should show you the contents of req.session.faveColor. The faveColor here is a session variable that we are accessing from the request object, because that is where you get access to all session variables and their values. By using req.session followed by a dot and the variable name, you can set as well as get any session variable, and the express session will do the rest for building and managing your session data. Now in the browser, if we access this route like so, you can see that it returns an undefined because we accessed a session variable that we have not created yet. So I'll create another route called setSession where I'll access the faveColor session variable and I'll set it to a string called red. Now if we access setSession, this will set the session key for us. Accessing the getSession route now shows the value of the faveColor as red, as expected. As you can see here, we are accessing two different routes, but we were able to persist this data across these two given stateless requests. Now, with our sessions done, let's move on to social authentication.